When I was 18 years old, it was discovered that I had a bicornuate uterus. And the easiest way to probably describe that is instead of it being a balloon shape, it's actually a heart-shaped. So I have a septum in the middle, basically almost separating the uterus or having the difficulty of being able to fall pregnant. So I was told that 3 things could possibly happen. 1, I wouldn't fall pregnant. 2, I would have a high chance of miscarriage. Or 3, I would likely have a premature baby. But I was 18, it wasn't really something that I was thinking about, so kind of pushed it away. Got to 24, had an appointment with our doctor, and he actually came and sat on the other side, on our side or my side of the desk, and said to me, I really need to know what you're doing. He goes, I don't know how hard this is going to be if children are something that you wanted, and I always wanted to be a mum. I'd really suggest you start thinking about it. Well, I was in the middle of my cycle, went home, we decided we'd start trying, and literally 12 days later, I was pregnant. 12 days. I had an appointment with him 2 weeks from that, so the next appointment was a couple of days later, and I was going into his office to tell him that I was in fact pregnant. And one of the first things that he said to me was, I wouldn't actually tell anybody because I don't expect you'll keep it. And I was heartbroken. I couldn't get out of there fast enough so I could sit in the car and cry. But I did, I fell pregnant very easy. At 6 weeks, I did start to bleed and thought, okay, this is what he's talking about, but the bleeding stopped. And then I ended up having quite, from there, a good pregnancy. I actually loved being pregnant. It was a very exciting time for us. I got to 29 weeks and started having what I thought was Braxton Hicks, but discovered that they were indeed contractions. Put into hospital. With medication, we were able to slow them down so they didn't progress, but I was there for the next 3 weeks. At 32 weeks, my waters broke. It wasn't a complete break, but it was enough that I was leaking fluid, so I was having 3-hourly ultrasounds to check that there was enough fluid around the baby and he was okay. At 34 weeks, though, there was nothing more that they could do, and I had Elijah. Absolutely probably the most terrifying time in my life. New mum, I know now that 34 weeks, the outcomes are quite good in terms of survival and obviously development and how they progress, but I didn't know that at the time, and it was terrifying. So he was taken away to the NICU. The hardest part of that journey I discovered was discharge day. Not his discharge, but my discharge day. I was in hospital 5 weeks before I had him, and not one person spoke to me about the fact that I'd be sent home without my baby. And they told me it was because I was okay and they needed the bed. And I just could not comprehend that. And it's really funny because now I think about it, and I've spent time, not a lot of time thankfully, but in the paediatric ward. When you're in that ward with your child, it's almost... you're almost shunned, or you would not dare to think to leave your child. It's not something considered that that's what you would do. But in a NICU, it's completely different. It's highly encouraged under the guise of you need to rest. It's better if you go home. And it wasn't better at all. But he spent 3 weeks in hospital before we were able to bring him home. When he was a year old, we decided to try again. Again, fell pregnant very easy. Wonderful, and then 6 weeks later got the same bleed. Not so scary this time because I thought, okay, we've been here, we've done that. And then the pregnancy started to progress. I had it in my mind that we'd get to 29 weeks and then I'd go on bed rest. They kind of gave me a little bit of a false assumption that because my uterus had done it before, that we would go a little bit further, that it was stretched, it would be okay. But it wasn't to be. At 26, just over 26 weeks, I started to get a lot of pain. It wasn't contractions, but a lot of burning pain. Put into hospital, and 4 days later, we could not stop Dylan from coming. So Dylan was born just over 27 weeks. He was just on a kilo, 1.065 grams. He was resuscitated when he was born and sent straight to the NICU. That experience was completely changing. He had a 9-week stay, and we had, although for a 27-weeker he did quite well, the doctors used to say, oh, he's just cruising, but we had brain bleeds, we had operations, we had setbacks, we had a lot of things with him. And that experience, again, completely changed my life. When I got him home, he was 35 weeks, and I remember sitting in bed and having him in my legs and just thinking, you should still be inside me for another month, and yet I've got you here at home. So we had that journey with him. The saving grace of going home with him was that the hospital had a program for the first 12 months of his life that we could go back at that group, and that was for babies born under 29 weeks, under 1,500 grams, which he qualified for. Elijah did, and I didn't even know about it. And at that group, I was in touch with other mums that had also been discharged in that last 12 months, and there was the allied health team. So we had a speech therapist, an OT, family support, a physiotherapist, lactation consultant, neonatologist, anybody that was there that was basically telling me I was doing okay and that he was doing okay. When we got to 12 months, we got discharged from that program, and that was it. And I remember thinking, he's 12 months, he's not walking, he's not talking, we're not on full solids yet, what happens now? And there was nothing, and I was so lost. So I started Googling. There was no social media back then. It's hard to think of a world without it. But I found organisations in the US and the UK that had been running from the 50s and the 70s. And here we were, 2005 in Australia, and had nothing, no national support group for these families. So I gathered some information, headed back to the hospital, and spoke to the head of the unit with the idea of a support group and also a charity. For me, I was so grateful that I would not have our babies without their work, that I wanted to have some kind of avenue to be able to donate back. That conversation with him, Robert, was something I'll never forget. And his words, one of the things that he said to me was, we do what we do really well medically, physically, and we know our hospitals are state of the art, especially if I'd had Dylan in other parts of the world, I wouldn't have had such a great outcome. But he said, what we don't do, or if we don't look after the emotional stability of the family that we're sending them home to, we're only doing half our job. He said, the baby's half the picture, the family's the full picture. And that really stuck with me, and it really made me realise that he got it. He got what I was trying to bring across, that it doesn't end when you get discharged from that hospital. So thankfully the hospital, it was the doctors, the nurses and the social work department actually put me in touch with other group of mums. So these became the founding mums of Miracle Babies. Women who will always have my heart. They saw my vision and they made it their own. Everybody had a NICU experience, but they were different. It was the first time I'd ever met a mum of quads. I couldn't imagine going through that experience with 4. It was hard enough with 1, but she did it. I met a mum who, as a result of prematurity, her son has severe cerebral palsy, and I've never met a mum whose baby had died. So we all had different experiences, but all came together. A few weeks after initiating Miracle Babies, found out by surprise that I was pregnant again. Unplanned, but definitely not unwanted. Oh, I was so excited. The second I'm pregnant, I'm just in love with this baby. And, looking at how to get through that. At 23 weeks, we had complications with him and I was put in hospital for 14 weeks. The difference with that experience was that I had these women around me. And inadvertently, it wasn't planned this way, but I basically became the first parent-supported person through Miracle Babies because I had them along the way. But what I discovered was that it worked. It worked. It changed how I went through that experience. And at 37 weeks, my beautiful Jasper came into the world. He was 3 weeks early and he needed 4 days in the hospital. So this is the one that I wanted to speak about, this word. What brought us together was the need for connection. And it was connection to materials, to education, to resources, as was spoken earlier, but it was actually connection to people. 15 years ago in a neonatal ward, you were not encouraged to talk to other families, you were not encouraged to ask about other babies. You basically went through that experience alone. When I went home, I'm Italian background, a lot of people around me, huge family, but the first person to have a premature baby, and no one got it. No one understood what I went through. The difference with us is that we knew that we could make a difference just by speaking to someone that's been there. And in 15 years of doing this, I know hands down that peer-to-peer support is the biggest way to make an emotional impact to a family's journey. And I've mentored or spent time in other groups, and it's the same in other disciplines, whether it's brain injury. I've worked with families that have children with autism, Crohn's disease. Everybody craves to be able to speak to someone who understands what you go through, and it makes a huge difference, that connection, not only to yourself when you're supporting someone, but they actually help you when you're going through it. So that was something that was big for us. So just a little bit background on Australia. So more than 48,000 babies are born premature and sick in Australia. It's bigger than the number of people that are diagnosed with prostate and breast cancer every year. doesn't always get the same amount of attention. Up to 1,000 babies lose their fight for life, making prematurity the biggest killer of Australian children. Families are 4 times more likely to suffer from the emotional impact, whether it's postnatal depression, relationship breakdown, financial difficulties, and more. So it's really important that these families are plugged in and have connection. And babies born earlier increased risk of a range of things like cerebral palsy, developmental delays, vision, hearing problems, behavioural, psychological challenges, and other chronic health challenges. So for us, we knew it didn't end. It didn't end when we got discharged from the hospital. It didn't end when we got discharged from that play group at 12 months. For us, it was something that was lifelong. So some of the things that we've been able to do in that time is the first thing was actually build a parent support program, which we call our Nurture program. So we support families from a threatened pregnancy, their time in hospital, and once they go home. And that support when they go home, it doesn't matter what weight or week the baby was born, and it's extended from 12 months to 6 years, and the baby and the children are ready for school, and we can still stay with them. And we have 24-hour family line, lots of resources. We run the largest online neonatal community, particularly through Facebook. I know Facebook can get a bad rap, but it's such an amazing tool to be able to engage with your community, and we use that whether it's through the work that we do in support, but we also have connections with clinicians and researchers that then tap into that audience. We also work with, so we do in-hospital parent support where past parents will come back and talk to them and support them through that journey and then remain with them. And also, since 2012, part of clinical trials, not only as advocates and helping to spread the word about trials, but also as investigators, like actually sitting on the outset and being part of that. So collaboration, that's probably, and I think that's what, when we're talking about partners in care, I think this is probably the number one reason Miracle Babies has been so successful. We started small and local at Liverpool, we grew across the state. We never grew because that's something we thought about. It was that we never wanted to turn anybody away. So grew across the state, then grew across the country because there was a need. And then with collaboration, we've been able to take the work that we do globally, which is amazing. But one of the things is that, remember the story I told you about Robert and his receptiveness, I guess, about the idea of Miracle Babies? One of the first things that he did was set up an appointment with the GM of the hospital. And he said, I really want you to, share what you're doing so that they have an awareness. And that GM is Teresa, sitting in the front row. So Teresa and I have such a special connection. But those two people really opened the door. And I think that's the really important thing when patients want to do good, when they want to make a difference, when they know what they've lived, to have the actual clinicians or the health system be receptive to that. And I know Miracle Babies wouldn't be what it is today if they hadn't been who they are. And actually embraced us. Nothing we have done, nothing we have designed or implement from start to even now do we do without having that partnership. We have a medical advisory committee. We do everything together. And I've mentored other groups who try, and I see why they struggle, because they set up their groups separate to the health system or to the hospital and then have it fully formed and then try and door knock and try and get it in. And it doesn't seem to have that much the same success. So I really think that was something really important to us. Then again in 2012, another professor, William Tano-Morty, he contacted me about our involvement in trials. And it wasn't really something that we had thought of. We were more a little bit focused about family support. But we know that we've made a major impact when they invited me to be an investigator. And for 3 years in a row, we've won awards at the Australian Clinical Trials Alliance, including this year being the inaugural Consumer Involvement Award. So that's been absolutely amazing. So there's 2 types of health customers that we see. One is that the people that use your service, which we call patients, and then the people who engage to improve the service, the consumers. So you need to be a patient first before you become the consumer, because it's your experience that makes you have that quality and makes you have that value. So we know that, and this is a cycle for us, working with patients who then want to become, I guess, consumers and then give back to health. This is just a visual of how we see ourselves positioned. The three main players, and it is a holistic view, is the families, the hospitals, and obviously it's centred around the newborns. Miracle Babies really sees itself as being able to have touch points in all those areas, whether it is through life-saving programs or life-changing things that we do for families, but also the ability to connect, collaborate, and bring together a community. And the thing is that it's so powerful in terms of being able to impact change, which we know that we have done, keep doing. And I was giving Teresa some examples that give me absolute goosebumps. And I had somebody say to me the other day, you're moving into legacy stuff. So it's absolutely amazing. But also being able to mobilise a community to give back. So remember when I said to Robert, I wish I had an avenue to be able to raise funds and to give you money because we wouldn't have our babies. As a collective, since the beginning, Miracle Babies has raised more than $10 million. And all that money has gone back into health, back into supporting families, back into making sure that we can have better, healthier outcomes. So I just wanted to show this really quickly. We've been really fortunate to get quite a little bit of a lot of media attention and have our stories shared and what our programs do. And this was an article about collaboration between clinicians and families. I don't know if you can read the quote, but from one of the doctors, he said it really makes sense to have parents involved from the outset and not just as patients at the end that you want to deliver the service to. But the thing that really gets me about this is that the journalist titled it Experts in Hope. And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, I know what the doctors do. Like, the doctors and the nurses are like God to me. Like, I would not have my babies without them, and they are absolutely the experts. Could never in a million years do what they do to help these babies survive and help them go home. But this we can do. Regular mums, regular dads, we can become experts in hope, in making a difference to that whole family's experience, because at the end of the day, we're all working together and we have the same joint goal of healthy outcomes. And these are my beautiful miracles. Aren't they amazing? So thank you.